The coins clinked softly against Arthur Pendleton's palm as he counted them for the third time on the sidewalk outside the Starlight Cafe. $43 and some loose change. Not much, but enough. He closed his fingers around the worn leather wallet, a supermarket special he'd picked up 2 years ago for $6.99, and slid it back into the front pocket of his jeans. Above him, the Starlight Cafe glowed like something out of a magazine spread. Brass fittings caught the late October sun. Inside, through floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the gleam of marble tabletops and the soft amber light of Edison bulbs strung between exposed copper pipes. The kind of place where a single slice of cake cost more than most people's lunches. A small hand tugged at the hem of his flannel shirt. "Daddy, are we really going in?" Arthur looked down. Lily stood beside him on the sidewalk, her autumn-colored curls bouncing beneath the green knit hat he poorly stitched back together after the pom-pom fell off. She was wearing her best dress, the blue one with tiny white flowers that Elena from the dry-cleaning place down the street had helped him iron perfectly flat. Her eyes were enormous and brown, fixed on the cafe's entrance with a mixture of wonder and barely concealed anxiety. "We really are, Bug," he said, and crouched down to her level, ignoring the way his knees cracked against the cold pavement. He straightened the collar of her dress with 2 fingers. "It's your birthday. You said you wanted a strawberry cake. They have the best strawberry cake in the whole city. Mrs. Patterson said so." Lily nodded very seriously. Mrs. Patterson was her first-grade teacher, and in Lily's estimation, Mrs. Patterson's word was second only to God's. "Mrs. Patterson is a woman of impeccable taste," Arthur agreed. "Ready?" Lily bit her lower lip. She looked back at the cafe, then at his shirt, the faded red-in navy flannel she'd watched him wash and hang dry 3 days running, and something flickered across her 6-year-old face. Something too old for 6. Something that made his chest ache deeply. "We're not the kind of people who go in places like that," she said quietly. It didn't sound like something a child had invented. It sounded like something a child had overheard, absorbed, and made her own. Arthur was very still for a moment. Then he reached out and gently pressed his palm against her cheek, tilting her face up toward his. "We're exactly the kind of people who go in places like that," he said. His voice was soft and completely certain. "You are exactly the kind of person who deserves a strawberry cake in the best cafe in the city. Don't ever let anyone tell you differently." "Okay." Lily studied him with those enormous, perceptive eyes. Then she gave a single, decisive nod. "Okay, Daddy." He took her hand. They went inside. The Starlight Cafe on West 54th Street was, by any objective measure, one of the most beautiful cafes in Manhattan. It occupied the entire ground floor of a converted Beaux-Arts building, with original plasterwork overhead and Persian rugs underfoot. The afternoon crowd was exactly what you'd expect. Women in cashmere, men in made-to-measure suits, the quiet, comfortable assurance of old money and new tech wealth. Conversation floated in the warm air alongside the scent of fresh espresso and jasmine. A few heads turned when Arthur and Lily stepped through the door. Not many, just enough. The quick, involuntary flicker of assessment, worn flannel, scuffed boots, a child in a dress that was clearly not from anywhere on this block, followed by the equally quick return to coffee cups and phones. The silent, automatic sorting that happened in places like this, so practiced it no longer even required conscious thought. Arthur noticed all of it. He always did. He simply chose not to care. He guided Lily to a small table near the window, slightly set apart from the main floor, with a good view of the street outside. Lily climbed into the chair and pressed her nose against the glass, watching a pigeon navigate the sidewalk below with absolute concentration. "It's fancy," she announced. "There's so many forks." "There are," he agreed, settling opposite her. "The small one is for the cake." A pause. "How do you know?" "I've been to a lot of fancy places." Lily considered this, apparently finding it only mildly implausible. "When, a long time ago, before you were born." He opened the menu, a leather-bound affair printed on heavy cream stock, and tilted it toward her. "Which strawberry cake do you want?" "There are 3. That redirected her attention immediately and completely. Lily leaned forward, nose wrinkling in fierce concentration, as though the fate of nations hung on this decision. It was while she was debating between the layered strawberry gatto and the strawberry shortcake that Elena Miller arrived at their table. Arthur had noticed her before she reached them. He had a habit of noticing people, cataloging them, a survival skill forged in a decade of rooms full of people who wanted something from him. The woman moving toward them across the cafe floor was in her late 20s, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical knot and a uniform that had the slight tailoring of someone who took her job seriously. She walked with the confident efficiency of someone who had been on her feet for hours and had no intention of letting it show. What set her apart from the other servers was the fact that she wasn't looking at him with that careful, evaluating blankness that people in service often wore when dealing with customers who didn't quite fit the decor. She was looking at Lily, specifically at Lily's green knit hat with the missing pom-pom, and she was smiling. Genuinely, not professionally. The kind of smile that reached the corners of her eyes. "Good afternoon," she said, stopping at their table. Her voice had a warmth to it that wasn't manufactured. "Welcome to the Starlight. My name's Elena, and I'll be taking care of you today." She turned to Lily. "And who might you be?" Lily looked up from the menu. "Lily. Well, Lily." Elena crouched slightly to bring herself to the child's eye level, an instinctive, unconscious gesture that Arthur registered without comment. "Is today a special day? Because I have a strong feeling that it might be." Lily's eyes went wide. "How did you know?" "Because you're wearing your best dress," Elena said confidently. "And your dad is letting you have the big leather menu all to yourself. That's very strong birthday evidence." Lily burst into a delighted giggle that she immediately tried to suppress by pressing both hands over her mouth. "It's my birthday. I'm 6 today." 6. Elena pressed a hand to her chest with an expression of appropriate awe. "That is a very serious age. What can I bring you for this very serious birthday?" "The strawberry gatto, please. The one with the extra cream." "Excellent choice." A woman who knows her mind. Elena stood and turned to Arthur, her notepad at the ready. Up close, she had steady gray eyes and a small scar at the corner of her chin that he found himself noticing for no particular reason. "And for you. Black coffee, please. And just the one cake." She nodded and noted it down. Then she paused, looked at Lily again, who had returned to her nose against the glass pigeon surveillance, and lowered her voice slightly. "I'll be right back with a candle for the cake, and I won't charge you for it." She met Arthur's eyes. "It's policy," she added, with a very slight smile that communicated that it was not, in fact, policy. Arthur held her gaze for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Thank you." She nodded and moved away. He watched her go, then turned back to his daughter. Lily had apparently resolved the pigeon situation to her satisfaction and was now swinging her legs beneath the chair with the patient, rhythmic energy of a child at maximum contentment. Arthur felt something shift, very slightly, in his chest. Something that had been clenched for a long time, releasing by a fraction. "Happy birthday, Lily," he thought. "This one's for you." They arrived at 12 minutes past 2. Tristan Vance and his entourage. Arthur heard them before he saw them. A particular kind of entrance, the kind designed to be heard, a displacement of air and attention that announced itself through raised voices and the sharp crack of expensive shoes against marble flooring. He glanced up from his coffee. Tristan Vance was 25 years old and had the face of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. He was handsome in the way of people who've had professional help being handsome, sharp jawline, tailored navy suit that probably cost $6,000, dark hair swept back with studied carelessness. On his arm was a woman with the carefully maintained beauty of someone whose primary occupation was being beautiful, and behind them came 2 more men of approximately the same vintage, wearing the same expression of bored, ambient superiority. Tristan scanned the room with the proprietary ease of someone who considered the entire world a private club he'd been born into. His gaze passed over Arthur and Lily, moved on, and then flickered back. Arthur had seen that look before. The slight double take of the very wealthy when confronted with the presence of someone who didn't belong in their peripheral vision. Like spotting a coffee stain on a white tablecloth. He turned back to Lily. "Is the cake good, Bug?" "It's the best cake in the world," Lily said, with absolute conviction. There was a small spot of strawberry cream on her nose that she was completely unaware of. "Daddy, do you think we could come back on my next birthday too? We could probably arrange that." He reached across the table and wiped the cream from her nose with his thumb. She scrunched her face. "Daddy, sorry, occupational hazard." She considered this, clearly uncertain what it meant, but determining from his tone that it was affectionate. She returned to her cake. The intrusion happened 4 minutes later. "Excuse me." Tristan Vance was standing at the edge of their table. He hadn't sat down at his own yet. He was standing there with his hands in his pockets and an expression that sat somewhere between amusement and contempt. "I'm going to need this table." Arthur looked up. "We're using it." "I can see that." Tristan's gaze moved over Arthur with the slow, deliberate thoroughness of a man appraising livestock. The worn flannel, the scuffed boots, the child with the borrowed birthday candle still burning down to its final centimeter. "But you see, I come here every Thursday. This is my table. And I don't particularly appreciate sharing my space with," a slight pause, "constructed for maximum effect, certain kinds of people." "There are other tables available," Arthur said. His voice was even, completely, unnervingly even. "That's not really the point, is it?" Tristan pulled out the chair opposite Arthur, Lily's side of the table, and sat down in it uninvited, forcing Lily to press herself back in her seat. She looked up at him with startled eyes, then looked at her father. "The point is that you people don't belong in here. You're making the other guests uncomfortable." "I'm not making anyone uncomfortable," Arthur said. "Your general." Tristan gestured vaguely at him. "Presence is uncomfortable. Places like this have a certain atmosphere. That atmosphere requires a certain standard." He smiled, thinly. From somewhere across the cafe, Arthur heard the distinct sound of a chair scraping back slightly, the quiet shuffling of people who were watching but had already decided not to get involved. That particular, recognizable silence of bystanders. "Daddy," Lily said very quietly. Her voice was small and careful, the voice of a child working hard not to be a burden. "Should we go?" And something in Arthur Pendleton's chest turned to stone. Not because of what Tristan Vance had said to him. He had been in rooms with men who made Tristan Vance look like an amateur. He had survived boardroom knives and hostile takeover attempts, and 2 distinct occasions on which people had tried to destroy him completely and had failed entirely. He had been insulted by professionals. But Lily's voice, that small, careful, apologetic voice, the voice of a child who had learned to make herself smaller so as not to cause inconvenience to the world, that was a different thing entirely. "No, sweetheart," he said quietly. "We're not going anywhere." He lifted his coffee cup and took a measured sip, his eyes staying on Tristan Vance's face the entire time. There was something in his gaze, something that had nothing to do with his worn flannel shirt or his secondhand boots, something that lived in the bedrock of him, that made Tristan Vance blink. Just once. But he blinked. Then Tristan looked away, the moment dissolving, and he stood from the borrowed chair. "Fine. Have it your way. But I'm going to have you removed." He pulled out his phone. Arthur didn't respond. He set down his coffee cup and looked at his daughter. "How's the cake, Bug?" But before Lily could answer, Tristan Vance, apparently deciding that waiting for management was insufficiently satisfying, turned back to their table. With one sharp, deliberate movement, he reached out and pushed Lily's plate off the edge of the table. The strawberry gatto hit the floor. The plate cracked in 2. The extra cream spread in a slow, irreversible splash across the Persian rug. The cafe went completely silent. Lily made a sound, not quite a cry, not quite a word, and pressed both her small hands flat against the table, staring at the broken cake on the floor. Then she looked at her father. Arthur Pendleton went very, very still. If you had known him, the other him, the one that existed in glass-walled conference rooms 40 floors above the street, the one who could dismantle companies with a single conversation, you would have recognized what happened to his face in that moment. The temperature drop, the absolute, Arctic stillness, the eyes that fixed on Tristan Vance the way a very patient, very dangerous man looks at something he has already decided to destroy and is merely determining the most efficient method. Tristan Vance, to his credit, recognized something of it too. He took a half step back, but Arthur did not move from his seat. He breathed once, through his nose. Then he reached into his pocket, took out a clean handkerchief, thin cotton, cheap but clean, and leaned forward to press it gently into Lily's hands. "Hey," he said softly, only to her. The rest of the cafe could have been on fire. "It's okay. He broke my cake," Lily whispered. Her lower lip was trembling. "I know. I'll get you another one." "But the candle," her voice cracked. "The candle was still burning. The lady gave me a candle. I know, Bug." He moved his chair around the table, put his arm around her, and held her small, shaking shoulders against his side. "I know. But you know what? Cakes can be replaced. You can't. And you are completely fine. Right. She buried her face against his shoulder and didn't answer, and he held her there, in the middle of the silent cafe, with the broken plate on the floor and Tristan Vance standing 3 feet away with an expression that was working hard to stay contemptuous and not quite managing it. "Get the manager," Tristan said to the nearest server. His voice was a fraction less steady than before. Now, Elena Miller had been watching from the moment Tristan Vance walked in. She'd worked the Starlight for 3 years. She knew the regulars, Tristan Vance among them, a young man who came in every Thursday with a specific purpose, as far as she could determine, of making other people feel small. She had a professional, highly practiced method of handling him. Neutral, borderline invisible service. A smile that communicated nothing, and the quiet, efficient redirection of any escalating situation before it could fully form. She had watched him approach Arthur and Lily's table with a familiar sinking feeling in her stomach. She was 5 tables away, mid-order, when the plate hit the floor. In 3 years at the Starlight, Elena had learned the fine calculus of service, when to intervene, when to stay back, when the situation was above her pay grade, and when it fell squarely in her territory. She had learned that inserting herself into disputes between wealthy customers was almost always the wrong call, professionally speaking. She had learned to care from a careful, managed distance. But she had also learned, in the years before the Starlight, in a childhood spent in thin-walled apartments with a mother who worked double shifts and a world that frequently and casually informed her she was not the kind of person who mattered, that there was a particular kind of silence that fell when everyone was watching and no one was moving. And that silence, left unbroken, had a way of teaching children things they should never have to know. She was across the cafe in 30 seconds. "Sir." She stepped directly in front of Tristan Vance, positioning herself between him and Arthur's table. Her voice had the particular quiet that makes people lean in to hear it. "I need you to return to your table." Tristan Vance looked at her name badge. "Elena, is that right?" "That's right. Elena, I've asked for the manager. I'd like this gentleman and his little companion removed from the premises." "I'm the floor manager on duty," Elena said, "and my answer is no." Dead silence. Tristan blinked. It was clearly not a word he encountered frequently in this context. "I beg your pardon. I won't be removing these guests." Elena held his gaze without blinking. She was acutely aware that every person in the cafe was watching, and equally aware that she was likely about to lose her job. She was also aware of the sound of Lily crying softly behind her, and Arthur's low, measured voice telling her it was okay, that everything was going to be okay. "What I will be doing is asking one of my staff to bring a replacement cake for the young lady whose birthday you just destroyed. I'll also be adding the cost of the broken plate and the rug cleaning fee to your bill today." She tilted her head very slightly. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" Tristan's face underwent a remarkable journey across approximately 3 seconds, surprise, disbelief, and then a slow, steadily building crimson fury. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I do," Elena said. "You're a customer who damaged property and disrupted the experience of other guests. Those are the things that are relevant in this establishment. My family's company does not change my answer." She held his eyes. "I need you to return to your table." Tristan took a step forward, using the height difference deliberately, in the way that some men did when they wanted the physical reality of the moment to do their arguing for them. "You're going to be fired," he said. He said it quietly, with the precision of someone who had done this before and knew exactly how it landed. "I'm going to make sure of it personally, and then I'm going to make sure you don't work anywhere in this city again. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I'm not making an empty threat. I have the specific means to do exactly what I'm describing." Elena felt her heart rate climb. She thought about her landlord, her mother's monthly prescriptions, the 3 months of savings she'd been carefully building. She said, "That's your prerogative, but it doesn't change my answer." Tristan stared at her for a long, evaluating moment. Then he pulled out his phone. "Charles," he said, when the line connected, "I need you at the Starlight on 54th. Right now. I have an insubordinate floor manager who needs to be dismissed on the spot, and a couple of individuals who need to be physically escorted from the building." He listened briefly. "I don't care what you're in the middle of," I said now. He hung up. He looked at Elena with the flat, satisfied expression of a man who had just remembered he was holding all the cards. Charles Whitmore is my family's regional business manager. He has authority over every establishment in this district that has any association with Vance Holdings. He gestured at the room around them, which includes this cafe. He smiled. So, you were saying? Elena didn't move. From behind her, a small voice said, Miss Elena. She turned. Lily was watching her from the shelter of Arthur's side, her eyes red-rimmed, her voice still slightly unsteady from crying. Are you in trouble because of us? Elena looked at the child for a moment. Then she stepped toward the table, crouched down to Lily's eye level, and said, Absolutely not. You've done nothing wrong. She reached into her apron pocket and produced a single birthday candle. The backup she always kept tucked there for the times a candle got blown out by accident or, as in this case, knocked onto an antique Persian rug. What do you say we get you a new cake? We put this candle in. You make a brand new wish. An even better one than before. Lily sniffled. She studied the candle with serious eyes. Then she looked at her father. Arthur Pendleton was watching Elena Miller with an expression she couldn't entirely decode. It wasn't just gratitude, not precisely. It was something closer to recognition, the particular way people look at each other when they understand, without needing to put it into words, that they are operating from exactly the same set of values. Thank you, he said. Elena nodded. Then she stood and turned back toward the entrance, where Tristan Vance was pacing with his phone in his hand, and she waited. Charles Whitmore arrived 11 minutes later. He came through the door of the Starlight Cafe with the brisk, no-nonsense stride of a man who had been interrupted during something important and wanted everyone in the room to understand that fact. He was 50 years old, silver-haired, with the stocky build of a former rugby player and the expensive suit of a man who had spent 3 decades climbing through the ranks of corporate management. He had 2 security personnel behind him, large men in dark jackets who he apparently considered adequate backup for what he'd been told was a straightforward ejection situation. Tristan Vance crossed the floor to meet him. Finally, he said, I called you 40 minutes ago. 11 minutes, Charles said, pulling at his cuffs with the automatic precision of a man who managed his appearance the way he managed his calendar. What's the situation? That table. Tristan pointed. The man and the child. I want them removed. And that woman, he pointed at Elena near the bar, fired. Immediately. She refused a direct instruction and addressed me in a manner that was completely unacceptable. Tristan. Charles's voice had the flat authority of someone who had been managing wealthy young men's temper tantrums long enough to find them tiresome rather than alarming. Save me the narrative. Just point me at the problem. That man. Tristan jabbed a finger toward Arthur's table. There, in the flannel. Have security remove him. Charles turned to look. He was already moving, mouth opening with the professional ease of a man prepared to deliver an efficient, legally clean dismissal when he saw the man's face clearly. He stopped. The movement was involuntary and total, the way a body stops when it encounters something that the brain is not yet finished processing. He stood in the middle of the Starlight Cafe with his mouth still fractionally open and his blood running, by the visible evidence, approximately 20 degrees colder than it had been moments before. Arthur Pendleton looked back at him from across the room. He did not look surprised. He did not look particularly interested. He had Lily settled on his knee now, one arm around her shoulders, and he was watching Charles Whitmore with the patient, slightly tired expression of a man who has been waiting for something to run its natural course. Mr. Charles Whitmore's voice emerged incorrectly. He cleared his throat. Tried again. Mr. Pendleton. The cafe had been quiet before. Now the quality of the quiet changed, curiosity sharpening into something else entirely, attention poised at the edge of a revelation. Tristan frowned. You know him? Charles didn't answer. He was already walking, not briskly now, not with the stride of a man interrupted from something important, but carefully, with the precise, deliberate care of someone navigating ground that had suddenly, without warning, become extraordinarily thin ice. He reached Arthur's table and stopped. Then Charles Whitmore, regional manager, 28-year company veteran, a man who had not voluntarily bowed to anyone below CEO rank in the entirety of his professional life. Bent at the waist, 90 degrees, and held it there. Sir, he said, I apologize for a pause in which he appeared to be genuinely searching for a word adequate to the situation. Disruption. Tristan Vance said, What the hell, Charles? Arthur said. He hadn't moved. His voice was quiet and completely unhurried, the voice of a man in full possession of the room. Stand up. Charles straightened. Who is he? Tristan's voice was doing something uncontrolled, rising at the ends. Who is this man? His name, Charles said, and his voice had the slightly mechanical quality of someone working very hard to prevent it from shaking, is Arthur Pendleton. He paused. He is the chairman and controlling shareholder of Pendleton Capital Group. Silence. And Pendleton Capital Group, Charles continued, with the air of a man pulling the pin from a grenade he was required by circumstances to hold, is the primary institutional investor behind Vance Holdings. Behind all of Vance Holdings. Every subsidiary, every property, every revenue stream your family controls. He looked at Tristan directly for the first time since entering the cafe, including this establishment. The color drained from Tristan Vance's face in a single, visible wave. Arthur looked down at his daughter. Lily, Bug, will you put your hands over your ears for just a minute? Lily obliged at once, pressing her palms flat against the sides of her head with the solemn gravity of a child who understood that something of consequence was about to occur and that it was not intended for her. Arthur lifted his eyes to Tristan Vance's face. What Tristan saw in that moment, stripped of the flannel shirt context, stripped of the coffee cup and the scuffed boots and the cracked plate on the floor and all the props of ordinary life, was the actual person who had been sitting at that table all along. Not a man who had wandered in from the wrong neighborhood. A man who had built things Tristan Vance could not begin to imagine building. Who had moved in rooms Tristan Vance would never have access to. Who had been watching this entire performance with the unhurried, patient attention of someone who knew exactly how it was going to end. My attorneys, Arthur said, will be contacting Vance Holdings within the hour to initiate the full divestment process. Tristan went white. What? All positions. All investment structures. All outstanding capital commitments. Arthur's voice was perfectly level. It was, in many ways, more devastating for its complete calm. No anger, no satisfaction. Simply the administrative clarity of a decision that had already been made. The entire portfolio, unwound, will be issuing formal notice of board seat withdrawal this afternoon. You can't do that. You'd be destroying. I'm fully aware of what it would mean for your family's operations, Arthur said. I'm certain your father will explain the precise mechanics when you speak to him. On what grounds? Tristan's voice had climbed several registers, losing whatever composure it had started with. On what possible grounds could you? On the grounds, Arthur said, that I choose who I invest in, and I choose not to invest in this. He looked at Tristan Vance with a long, measured steadiness. You pushed my daughter's birthday cake onto the floor. You reduced an honest woman to near tears for doing her job with integrity. You have spent the last hour using financial leverage as a weapon against people who have less than you, in a room full of witnesses. He paused. I've seen worse behavior, Mr. Vance, but I haven't seen it recently, and I have no intention of subsidizing it. Tristan's legs appeared to fail him. He sat down heavily in the nearest chair. Please. The word came out stripped of everything it had been coated with when he'd walked through the door, stripped of the suit and the swagger and the carefully constructed aura of untouchable privilege. Just the word raw and exposed. My father's company. If you pull out now, the debt ratios alone, the covenants, it would cascade. It would, he stopped. Please. I have a family. There are people who depend on that business. It's not just me. Arthur was quiet for a moment. I know that, he said, which is why the divestment will be structured to give your father's team a 30-day window to secure alternative financing. He paused. I said I'd unwind our positions. I didn't say I'd burn the house down. What happens in those 30 days is your father's responsibility. And yours. He looked at Tristan steadily. You knew how interconnected these structures were. You've seen those financial disclosures. You chose to behave the way you did regardless. Tristan stared at the floor. His face was doing something complicated and private. Then, in a movement that appeared to happen against his own will, he slid forward from the chair. His knees hit the Persian rug, the same rug now stained with his own deliberate cruelty, and the entire cafe witnessed it in utter silence. I'm sorry, Tristan said. He was not looking at Arthur. He was looking at Lily, who had removed her hands from her ears and was watching him with the enormous, unblinking eyes of a child processing something entirely outside her experience. I'm sorry. For your cake. For he stopped. I was wrong. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Arthur looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Lily. What do you think, Bug? He said quietly. You're the one he owes the apology to. Lily looked at the man on the floor. She looked at her father. Then she looked back at Tristan with the precise, thoughtful gravity of a 6-year-old who has inherited her father's particular talent for assessment. You should get up, she said. Kneeling on the floor is bad for your knees. Mrs. Patterson says so. The cafe let out an exhale that sounded almost like laughter. Arthur turned to Elena, who was standing near the bar with her hands clasped in front of her and an expression that was working very hard to remain professional. Ms. Miller, he said, with the same quiet authority he'd used for everything else. I want to be completely clear. You are not losing your job today. What you did today was exactly what this industry requires of its very best people. I'll be making sure that's formally recognized. Elena opened her mouth. And the coffee, he added, turning back to his daughter. If you don't mind. It got cold. The corner of Elena's mouth lifted. Coming right up, she said. And 1 strawberry gatto. Extra cream. Extra cream, Lily confirmed with satisfaction. The following Thursday, Arthur came back. Elena saw him before he saw her. He was standing at the entrance in the same worn flannel shirt, holding Lily's hand, looking at the room with the same unhurried patience he brought to every moment of the previous week's extraordinary afternoon. Lily was wearing a different hat today, blue, with all of its pom-pom intact. Elena crossed the floor. Table for 2, she said. Arthur looked at her. Something in his expression was different from the chairman of the board composure she'd witnessed at the end of the previous Thursday. Looser, somehow. Not quite uncertain, but approaching it. If that's all right. More than all right. She led them to the same window table. He had called the cafe that Friday morning. Not personally, but through his office, a brief and professional communication in which his assistant informed the Starlight's managing director that Arthur Pendleton wished to extend his personal gratitude to Elena Miller for her conduct on Thursday and to confirm that her position was entirely secure. This had been relayed to Elena by her managing director with an expression suggesting the simultaneous receipt of wonderful news and a moderately severe cardiac event. Elena had said thank you and returned to her tables. She had not expected him to come back. The same as last time? She asked, when they were seated. Please, Arthur said. And Lily wants to know if you have any other flavors of birthday cake. It's not my birthday, Lily said, to Elena, as a point of clarification. But Daddy said maybe I could have a piece of regular cake anyway, since the last one was an emergency. A very reasonable position, Elena said seriously. We have 3 kinds today. I'll bring you a menu. When she returned with it, she found Arthur attempting to tuck a paper napkin into the neckline of Lily's sweater with approximately 0 success. Lily kept twisting away from him with the impatient flexibility of a 6-year-old who had other priorities. Lily, Arthur said, it stops the drips. I don't drip. You absolutely drip. You dripped last week. There was documented evidence. That was an accident. Elena set down the menu, took the napkin from Arthur's hand, folded it into a neat triangle, and tucked it into Lily's neckline in approximately 2 seconds. Lily examined it. That's better, she allowed. Arthur stared at his own hands for a moment, as if they had failed him in some fundamental way. Then he looked at Elena. How do you? Lots of practice, she said. My neighbor has 3 kids. I babysit on weekends. A pause. Arthur looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite categorize. Not attraction. Exactly. Not yet. More like the way someone looks when they keep finding something where they didn't expect it. Something that keeps reasserting itself. She won't let me do her hair either, he said, with the patient, slightly baffled air of a man confronting an ongoing personal failure. I've watched 14 YouTube tutorials. Elena pressed her lips together to hold back a smile. Hair is difficult. Is it specific styles? Braids. She wants them, but every time I try, he gestured at Lily's curls, which were currently doing approximately whatever they wanted. It ends up looking like something a bird might consider building a home in. Lily nodded with the sorrowful, corroborating solemnity of a long-suffering eyewitness. I could show you, Elena said. It came out before she'd entirely finished thinking it through. The basic technique. It's not actually that complicated once you understand the crossing over motion. Would you? He said it quickly, then seemed to catch himself. He cleared his throat. I mean, if it's not a problem. I know you're working. I'm on break in 20 minutes, Elena said. It won't take long. She returned on her break as promised, pulling a chair from the adjacent table and settling beside Lily with the easy, practical familiarity of someone who had spent considerable time around children. She talked Lily through the process as much as she talked Arthur through it, letting Lily hold the sections while Elena demonstrated the crossing over motion, the light but consistent grip, the way to handle the elastics without pulling. Arthur watched with intense, focused concentration, as though he were memorizing a critical technical procedure, which, Elena realized, he was. Try it, she said, and moved back. Arthur took a breath, repositioned his chair behind Lily, and began. Lily was, in this moment, angelic, sitting perfectly still with the kind of deliberate, loving patience that was a very particular form of 6-year-old generosity extended toward an imperfect adult who was trying hard. Arthur's large, rough-knuckled hands moved carefully through her curls, too carefully, with the delicate uncertainty of someone for whom this kind of task remained genuinely alien. The result, when he'd finished, was, objectively, better than a bird's nest. But only marginally. There was a considered pause. It's great, Daddy, Lily said, with the full-throated conviction of a child who had decided that love mattered more than aesthetics. I really like it. Arthur looked at Elena. Elena said, carefully, it's a first attempt. It looks like something I should be embarrassed by. It looks like someone who's trying. She met his eyes steadily. That counts for a great deal more than you think it does. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, so quietly it was almost to himself, she'd have been better at it. Her mother. A pause. She was good at everything like that. The small things. Elena didn't say anything. She simply stayed where she was, present and unhurried, in the way she had of giving space without withdrawing from it. Arthur seemed to recalibrate. He straightened, looked at his daughter's lopsided braid, and appeared to arrive at some private decision. Same time next Thursday? He asked. I'll be here, Elena said. The Thursdays became a rhythm. Arthur came back the following week, and the week after, and the week after that. Sometimes he brought work, a tablet, occasionally a folder of documents that he'd set aside without apology when Lily demanded his attention. But more often he came empty-handed, just the flannel shirt and the worn boots and Lily in her revolving collection of hats. He was, Elena observed across those weeks, a contradiction that refused to resolve neatly. The coldest eyes she had ever seen in a face that softened completely and without reservation when he looked at his daughter. The man who had dismantled a family's corporate standing in 3 measured sentences, who then spent 45 minutes on a Thursday afternoon earnestly debating with a 6-year-old which cloud outside the window looked most like a rabbit. He never asked Elena questions about herself in the direct, frontal manner of most men she'd known. But over weeks of Thursday afternoons, she found herself telling him things anyway. The neighborhood she'd grown up in, the flower shop her mother had run that had been her favorite place as a child, the reason she'd taken the management track at the Starlight rather than the culinary program she'd been accepted to 3 years ago. He listened without advising, without redirecting, without waiting for his turn to speak. It was rarer than she'd come to expect. One Thursday in November, he arrived without Lily, and Elena felt the absence immediately. She's at a sleepover, he said, settling at the window table with the slightly displaced look of a man whose usual coordinates had been removed. Her friend Charlotte's house. First one. How's she doing with it? Excited. Terrified. A pause. Both simultaneously, I think. She's been calling me every hour on the hour. And how are you doing with it? He looked at her. Then, in the first genuinely unguarded expression she had seen from him, he said, considerably worse than she is. Elena laughed. It surprised him. She could tell in the way his expression opened slightly at the sound of it, as if laughter were something he'd been encountering less frequently than he'd realized, and was finding, unexpectedly, that he'd missed. She's fine, Elena said. She is extraordinarily resilient for her age. She stopped, edited herself, then decided not to. You've done a remarkable job with her. As a single parent. You know that. Arthur looked at his coffee. I'm not certain I've done anything particularly remarkable. I've mostly just tried to be present, which is the very least of what she deserves. More parents than you'd think can't manage even that much. He nodded, but she could see that he didn't fully absorb the reassurance. There was something behind his eyes that she'd been learning to recognize across these weeks, a persistent, undissolved weight. Something he'd been carrying for a long time, something that hadn't yet found a place to set itself down. She wanted to ask about it. She wasn't ready to yet, and she sensed he wasn't ready either. But she was beginning to understand that they were both, in their own quiet ways, getting there. The call came on a Tuesday in late November. Elena was between lunch and dinner service when her phone buzzed, an unknown number, a Manhattan prefix. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something made her answer. Elena. Arthur's voice was wrong. Not wrong in the controlled, measured way of a man managing a difficult room. Wrong in the underneath the control way, where the control had slipped just enough to let her hear what it was actually containing. Arthur, what's happened? Lily has a fever. A pause. A high one. 104. We're at Mount Sinai, the emergency department. They say she's going to be completely fine. It's a respiratory infection. They have her on medication, they've said. He stopped. I'm sorry. I don't know why I called you. I'm coming, Elena said. You don't need to. I'm coming. She took a cab. It was the extravagance she could least afford and didn't hesitate over for a single second. She found him in a pediatric waiting area on the 4th floor, Arthur Pendleton, in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights, still in the flannel shirt, with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. The particular contained stillness of a man fighting something very hard, with no visible opponent. Lily was sleeping behind a curtain in the adjacent bay, hooked to a monitor, her temperature already down 2 degrees since admission. The nurse had told him she'd be perfectly well within 48 hours. He had the information. It was not, at present, helping. Elena sat down beside him. She didn't make an entrance of it, didn't announce herself dramatically. She simply sat, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, and waited. After a while, he took his face out of his hands. She was calling for her mother, he said. His voice was completely stripped of its usual covering. In her sleep. For about 20 minutes. I sat right beside her, and I couldn't. He stopped. Elena waited. My wife's name was Margot, he said. She died 3 years ago. An accident on Route 9, coming home from her sister's house. A delivery truck crossed the center line. She didn't. He stopped again. She didn't survive the impact. Elena didn't speak, but she reached out and put her hand over his where it rested on his knee, and she felt the way his breath changed at the contact, something releasing, a door opening somewhere that had been sealed for 3 years. Lily was 3. She doesn't really remember, not truly. What she has is what I've told her, what I've shown her in photographs. Her memory of her mother is the memory I've built for her. He looked at the curtained bay. I took her out of the city because I couldn't stay. I couldn't stay in the apartment, in the life we'd built together. It felt like the walls were, he exhaled slowly. I thought if I stripped everything away, the money, the position, the company, everything I'd built for 15 years, if I made myself small enough, if I became nothing for a while, it would somehow pay it back, Elena said softly. He turned and looked at her. It was the expression of someone who has been trying to articulate something for 3 years and has just heard another person say it precisely. Yes, he said, as if the smallness was a kind of penance, as if I had earned the right to be diminished. You didn't cause the accident, Elena said. It wasn't a question. No. Logically, I know that. You were working, building things. She was coming home from her sister's house on an ordinary Tuesday. Elena kept her voice quiet and steady. There's no moral equation in which that becomes your fault. There's no amount of flannel shirts that changes the arithmetic of it. He was quiet for a long moment. She'd have been better at all of it, he said finally. The braid. The napkin trick. Tonight. She'd have known exactly what to say to Lily right now, what to do, how to make her feel safe. She would have. His voice broke, just at the edge. She would have known. So do you, Elena said. When you stop using all your energy to punish yourself for something you didn't do, you will find that you know exactly what to do. She didn't look away. You call me tonight. When she was sick and you were frightened and you couldn't find the floor, you called someone. That is not nothing. That is a man learning, very slowly and in the hardest possible way, to let someone in. She paused. Lily is going to be fine. She is going to wake up tomorrow and want breakfast, and she's going to look out the hospital window and tell you the clouds look like something, and you're going to guess wrong, probably several times. and she is going to find that completely hilarious. That is going to happen. Tomorrow. She squeezed his hand once, gently. And Margot. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Margot gave her to you. Specifically to you. And you are doing exactly what she would have wanted. Anyone who has spent 5 minutes watching you with that little girl knows that. Lily looks at you like you hung the moon and have been maintaining it in good working order ever since. Arthur Pendleton, chairman, controlling shareholder, a man who had not permitted himself to fall apart in front of another person in 3 years, pressed the back of his free hand against his mouth and closed his eyes. She stayed, shoulder against shoulder in a plastic hospital chair, in the fluorescent quiet of a pediatric ward at 11 at night, not filling the silence, not trying to fix it or manage it or move it along, just staying, which was the thing he needed and the thing he'd forgotten it was acceptable to need. From behind the curtain, a small, sleepy voice said, "Daddy?" Arthur was on his feet in an instant. Elena followed him to the curtain's edge. Lily was awake, propped slightly against her pillow, blinking in the light. Her cheeks were flushed and her curls were pressed flat on one side. She looked, as small children invariably do when sick, simultaneously smaller and more essential than usual, something distilled down to its most important parts. "Hey, Bug." Arthur was at her side, his hand on her forehead, her small hand in his. Lily blinked past him and found Elena at the doorway. "Miss Elena?" "Hey, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" Lily considered this question with professional gravity. "Like 100 warm blankets," she decided. "That sounds about right." Elena crossed to the other side of the bed and tucked the blanket gently under Lily's arms. "The medicine is working. You're going to be completely fine." Lily looked at her. Then she looked at her father. Then, with the uncanny, unfiltered perceptiveness of a child who has had nothing to do for hours but notice things, she looked at their hands. Arthur's still loosely holding Elena's at the edge of the bed, an unconscious continuance of the waiting room, and her face produced an expression of quiet, complete, 6-year-old satisfaction. "Good," she said, and closed her eyes again. They sat on either side of her bed through the night, taking turns with the plastic chairs, and trading the silence back and forth between them like something they had both been carrying for a long time and had just realized they didn't have to carry alone. Neither of them made a thing of it. It didn't require making a thing of. In the small hours of the morning, when Lily's temperature had fallen to 99 and the night nurse had confirmed she was sleeping normally, Arthur looked at the ceiling with the specific expression of a man standing on the other side of something large and said, "I've been using her to stay small." Elena looked at him. "Lily, I told myself it was for her. The ordinary life, the neighborhood, the flannel shirts. And some of it was genuinely for her. She needed something stable and quiet and consistent after losing her mother." He was quiet for a moment. "But some of it was for me. A place to hide. A way to step out of a life that had become unbearable and call it sacrifice." "You're allowed to hide sometimes," Elena said. "Everyone is. Not for 3 years. Not while your daughter is growing up." He looked at Lily, small and sleeping and already more herself than she'd been 3 hours ago. She deserves a father who is actually present, not someone performing smallness as an act of contrition. He paused. "I think I've known that for a while. I just needed someone to sit with you while you figured it out." He turned and looked at her across the sleeping form of his daughter. In the dim, utilitarian light of the hospital room, without the armor of either of his personas, neither the struggling single father nor the untouchable chairman. He was simply a man in his mid-30s who was tired and relieved and in the process of deciding to do better. "Yes," he said, "something very much like that." Elena held his gaze. "You're not punishing yourself anymore," she said. "Starting now." He almost smiled. It was different from any expression she'd drawn from him before, not the reluctant, surprised humor she'd coaxed out across months of Thursday afternoons. Something quieter, something that lived closer to peace than he'd been in a long time. "Starting now," he agreed. The cherry trees on Central Park West were in full bloom when Lily Pendleton, aged nearly 7, announced at breakfast that Elena was going to marry her daddy. She said it with the same calm, decisive authority she brought to all the things she had decided were true, the settled weight of lived evidence behind her. Case closed, discussion optional. Elena, who was sitting across the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the slightly unfocused quality of someone who had been awake since 6 helping Arthur debug a French toast recipe, set down her cup. "Is that so?" she said. "I've been thinking about it for a very long time," Lily said, addressing her French toast with the air of someone presenting considered findings. "Since the hospital, when you held Daddy's hand in the waiting room and you didn't let go." She looked up briefly. "I think you should live here. We have a spare room, and also Daddy said he might get a dog, and dogs need 2 people." "I said we might discuss getting a dog," Arthur said from the stove. "Same thing," Lily said, with the immovable certainty of 6 going on 7. Elena looked at Arthur's back. His shoulders were doing something, a subtle, involuntary movement that she had learned over months of Thursday afternoons and hospital nights and 3 a.m. kitchen conversations to identify as suppressed laughter. She looked back at her coffee and pressed her lips together. "We'll see," she said. "That means yes," Lily informed her. "Daddy says we'll see, and it always means yes." "It does not always mean yes," Arthur said. "The dog discussion," Lily said. "The swimming lessons. The extra dessert that one time. The trip to the Science Museum on a Tuesday." A pause. "Those are specific circumstances. They're a pattern," Lily said, with the incontrovertible satisfaction of someone who has marshaled her evidence and knows it. They took it slowly. It was the right way, and both of them knew it, and both of them had learned, in different ways, by roads that looked nothing alike, that the things worth having were worth approaching with patience and care. Arthur did not stop wearing the flannel shirts. He wore them on the weekends and on Thursday afternoons and on the long, unhurried Sunday mornings that had become their particular institution. Lily sprawled on the living room floor with a book. Arthur at the kitchen table with work he was increasingly willing to set aside. Elena making coffee and listening to the specific, irreplaceable music of people who are genuinely comfortable in each other's company. He put the tailored suits back on during the work week, because it was time and he knew it was time, and he did it without ceremony or apology. He was the chairman of Pendleton Capital Group. He was also the man in the flannel shirt. He was Lily's father and the person who consistently, reliably guessed wrong about what the clouds looked like. None of these things canceled the others. They were all simply him. Elena did not become a different person. She did not stop being the woman who had stepped in front of a table in the middle of a crowded cafe because a child was crying and no one else was moving, who had kept a spare birthday candle in her apron pocket, who had sat in a plastic hospital chair for 6 hours because someone needed her there. These were not things she was asked to leave behind. They were, in fact, a significant part of why she was here. What she gained was a kitchen she was comfortable in, a child who had firm opinions about her hair and expressed them freely, a man who listened to her the way people listen to things they intend to keep, and the Starlight Cafe, which, after some thoughtful conversations between Arthur and the managing director and some restructuring of the ownership arrangements, became something closer to what it should have always been. Elena became, among other things, a partner in the cafe's management, with a genuine stake in how it was run and who it welcomed through its doors. The new floor policy, framed simply near the entrance, read, "All guests are welcome here." It was not decorative. It was practiced. In October, a year and a week after a birthday cake was pushed onto a Persian rug on West 54th Street, Arthur took Lily and Elena to the Starlight for Lily's 7th birthday. They sat at the same window table. The afternoon light came through the same floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the marble tops golden and catching the dust in the air above the Persian rugs, which had been cleaned and kept, and remained exactly where they'd always been. The server who arrived was young and slightly nervous and very earnest. He took their order carefully, without looking at Arthur's flannel shirt or Lily's latest hat, red, with both pom-poms perfectly intact, as anything other than the ordinary, unremarkable things that existed in the room. When the strawberry gatto arrived, extra cream, a single candle, the kind reserved for birthdays, Lily looked at it for a long, serious moment with those enormous brown eyes. "Do I have to keep my wishes secret?" she asked. "Wishes usually work better when you keep them," Arthur said. "I already told you mine anyway," Lily said, to Elena, with transparent, cheerful accusation. "You told the whole breakfast table," Elena pointed out. Because it came true. Lily looked at them both with the open, unguarded happiness of a child who has gotten exactly what she wanted and sees no reason to disguise this fact. She looked at her father. Ready? Arthur leaned his elbows on the table, his face level with hers, the way he'd been doing since she was old enough to sit across from him at tables, and said, "Ready." Lily Pendleton took a deep breath. She blew out the candle. In the small drift of smoke, in the warmth of the Edison lights overhead, in the particular, unrepeatable instant of a wish going out into the world, Arthur Pendleton looked at his daughter and then at the woman beside her, and felt the specific, uncomplicated thing that he had spent 3 years convincing himself he did not deserve and had no right to reach for. He was wrong about that. He understood that now, clearly, the way you understand things once someone has sat beside you in a plastic hospital chair and refused to leave. "What did you wish for?" Lily asked him. "I wish for you to stop putting hot sauce in my orange juice," he said. "Daddy, that was a science experiment about taste perception. It was educational." She turned to Elena. "What did you wish for?" Elena picked up her fork. "I wished for the extra cream," she said. Lily considered this with great seriousness. That was a very practical wish, she decided, and turned her full attention to her birthday cake with the complete, settled satisfaction of someone who has arranged the world precisely as it should be. Outside the window, the October sun did what October sun in New York City does. It burned gold and a little unreliable, the particular kind of autumn light that makes everything it touches look as if it has just been recovered from something and is now, finally, returned to where it belongs. Arthur Pendleton watched his daughter eat her birthday cake. He did not think about what he had lost. He thought about what was here, the spot of strawberry cream on Lily's chin that she hadn't noticed yet, the way Elena was already reaching for a napkin to wipe it off, the red hat with both pom-poms, the open windows, the long afternoon still ahead of them, the sound of Lily explaining to Elena the precise reasons why her wish had been, strategically speaking, the better one. He thought about all the small things. He thought about how, for years, he had made himself small in a misguided attempt to pay for a debt that hadn't been his to carry. How he had stripped away everything he built and called it grief, when really it had been fear. The fear of being large in a world from which the most important thing had been suddenly, violently removed. He thought about a woman who had kept a birthday candle in her apron pocket because she believed in being prepared for moments that mattered. He thought about a worn flannel shirt hanging in a closet full of tailored suits, and how both things were true, and how neither one was the whole story. And for the first time in 3 years, the small things were not a consolation prize for the life he'd lost. They were the life he had, and it was, in every way that counted, enough.